Hello and welcome to the Wigton Book Festival. I'm Heather Parry and I am coming to you today from Glasgow. Obviously, we're not all in Wigton as we would love to be this year, but we can make up for it for sharing our love of books in a digital platform, which I think is a beautiful thing for us to do. I'm here today to talk to the brilliant writer Kendra Green, who is coming to us from Dallas, Texas. Is that right, Kendra?
Indeed it is.
So very different.
Yeah, it's still the morning here.
Oh yeah, of course. I hope you've had your coffee. We're talking today about the beautiful book, which my kittens have chewed, The Museum of Whales You Will Never See, which is from Granta Books. And it is a slowly unfolding, achingly beautiful exploration of a country and its people. But more broadly, it's about the comfort of collection, of what we build over the course of a life, and about the pleasure of sharing in the eccentricities of other people. I'd say it's quite literally the perfect book to read at the end of such a tumultuous year. It's the kind of book that reminds you of all the small pleasure that there is to take in the world, and how important it is to hold on to those things as well. Kendra, I realize I've not given you your full introduction yet. Kendra Green is an essayist, printer, and a maker of artists' books. She's a guest artist at the Nasher Sculpture Center, a fellow at Harvard University's Library Innovation Lab, a visiting assistant professor at the University of Texas, and an associate editor at Southwest Review. Welcome, Kendra.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
If only we could be properly together in Wigton, but this is a close second, I think. I think today you're going to start us out by giving us a reading and an introduction to the book.
Let's start at the very beginning. Okay. I mean, the very beginning being this beautiful cover for a book that I think of as being so much about the things that we hold on to, right? The way that human beings love stuff, right? We just have to look around our very surroundings this moment to know we love things, but we love stories. We need stories even more. And the kind of amazing thing, it took me a while to see this, is the way that we hold on to things, but also repair, repurpose, claim, invent, make things so that they can hold on to those stories. So I'm so grateful that Grant has made an appropriately glorious object to try to give these stories a home. In the very beginning of the book, there will be some orientation material for Icelandic pronunciation and currency to remind you about the merker that weighs only babies. That's the only thing that unit gets used for. But the beginning of the text, we start with arrival. Lilia collects me from the airport under a gray morning sky and, swinging my bag into her little silver car, asks if I got her message not to worry about the volcano. Because you shouldn't, and it won't affect your trip, and these things happen all the time. The whole transatlantic approach from Boston to Reykjavik takes less than 5 hours, which is scarcely time enough to fall asleep or start a third in-flight movie or convince yourself of the proper pronunciation of every unfamiliar letter in the Icelandic alphabet, F and Thorn especially. But it is apparently long enough to board an airplane and cross half an ocean without having any idea you were aimed straight at a sudden increase in seismic activity. Not that it should be surprising. Just the 45 minutes from the international airport to the bus terminal downtown is a misty drive through old lava fields and venting hot springs, a gradual accumulation of houses and buildings tracing the ocean's edge of an island straddling two tectonic plates. An island that rose up from these waters in the first place precisely because of those plates, their penchant to slip and grind and spill their molten heart. Lilia says, "Don't worry about the volcano," and in the same breath begins to describe the possibility of ash clouds and gas masks and helicopters plucking hikers from the mountains because there's no better way to alert them that they may be in mortal peril. She pulls up the National Weather Service's website, teaches me to toggle from the outline of Iceland annotated with the forecast of rain, to the one predicting the visibility of the northern lights, to the dots and stars mapping a string of tiny earthquakes, every shift and shock detected for the last 72 hours. Mostly, on the map, they register not much more than a 3.0 on a Richter scale. I grew up along another shoreline in California, and the freckling map prompts a certain kind of nostalgia, a tenderness for these almost imperceptible events. I am to keep vigil, Lilia says. I am to refresh and refresh and refresh the map. It doesn't matter that they are tiny. It doesn't matter that they're all but obscure. I am to watch whether the number of tremors waxes or wanes. I am to notice how their alignment is not random, every one of them a sign. I am to witness. Their accumulation, in fact, articulates the frontiers of fault line and fissure we cannot otherwise see. It describes those underpinnings, shaping everything else. And though we may tremble, it points us ever toward what may just happen next. The ridgelines here are black rock or lupine laced, perhaps dotted with sheep, if not dusted with snow. Where there is shoreline enough, I pick up sea glass and shards of china, walk past feathers and sometimes bones. I have come, I think it is right to say, because of the borders of this place. Because not just here, but always, something happens at the edges. I have come for the perimeter of territory staked out under the name museum. Because for all the museums I have worked for or volunteered at or interned with, for all the continents where I have been the museum visitor, I have never known a place where the boundaries between private collection and public museum are so profoundly permeable, so permissive, so easily transgressed, and so transparent as if almost not to exist. So maybe don't make plans until we know if the lava is melting the glacial ice, if the flood of all that water unbound will close the northern roads or the southern roads, or who knows, it's happened. Both. They say that if you're baptized wrong, if the holy water does not wash over your eye, you may retain another sight, may see the elves even when they do not choose to reveal themselves to you. And I feel something of that old story here, that I have been given a glimpse of something extraordinary, hidden, though it was there the whole time, interwoven amid everything else we see or know or put in our pockets or hold in our hands. Sometime later, in the calm of a museum cafe, I will be chatting with a family visiting from my homeland, and I will tell them how the local museum studies professor puts the count at 265 museums and public collections in this country of 330,000 people. How that alone would be astonishing. But remember, almost all these places have been established in the last 20 years, like seeds dormant forever and then triggered at last by some great fire, some sharp snap of frost to finally take root and bloom. Amazing, they agree. Though they sit there in the museum cafe, sipping their coffees, never leaving the antechamber for the exhibits within. Outside, the mist collects and recedes, gathers up and blows through, the world beyond the museum's glass wall, always there, but veiled, disintegrating, fading in and out of perception's reach. And anyway, it doesn't have to flood. It could spew ash. Maybe the crops die, maybe the sheep are poisoned, maybe you breathe through a washcloth and famine sparks the French Revolution. These are old forces, the magma and the tremors, the famine and the want, the way we love rocks and birds and old boats and brass rings, and the way we survive this world because of the stories we fashion from its shards. We do not just keep and collect things, amass and restore them. We trouble ourselves to repurpose, create, and invent things just to carry, a little easier, those stories we cannot live without. Enchantments and mysteries and monsters and the woman on the cusp of transformation, searching for her sealskin so she can return home, become again what she was before. This is what we have always held on to. This is how we lash ourselves to the mast. These are old forces, irresistible, shaping the world anew.
Thank you so much. I just love that, and you breathe such life into it as well. I love reading something and listening to the author read that same thing out loud. It's like two whole different experiences. That's such a great start to the book, because obviously we have you landing in what to you is a foreign country. But what was the background to that? Can you tell us how the book came into being?
So it starts almost a decade ago with the existence of a travel grant. I was in graduate school, and there was the possibility of leaving the country for at least a month and $2,000 at my disposal if I could just come up with a good enough excuse to claim it. Which I feel like any of us right now, if we just took 5 minutes, could write that proposal. There are places we need to be, right? There are things we need to know. But it was taking me a while. I couldn't get behind anything that felt good. And I was telling this to a friend, right? I was running out of chances to apply for this thing. And I've been writing about museums. I've got a background in them. And it just stunned me as a collections manager to consider all of the stories we didn't tell, right? Things that stayed in the vault. And even more than that, right? For storytelling institutions to not pay attention, right? To not catalog, to not keep track, to not tell the stories they themselves generate, which there were going to be a lot of them, right? To interact with the public invites things to happen. Never mind the basic, quixotic, beautiful, heartbreaking job of trying to hold on to things when everything resists it, right? Everything is at some point falling apart. So I had a friend who sent me I assume the first Google search result for world and museum. And there, I think maybe the 7th spot or so, was a museum that reminded me that I had once in my life met an Icelander. And when I asked Gardar what I should possibly know about this country, the solitary fact that he volunteered was, we have a penis museum, the only one in the world. Which, if you're feeling prudish, I was feeling prudish. It sounded sophomoric, right? But when I clicked on it, and it was in Icelandic, and I was looking for the option to have the page in any other language, and I realized that it was available in 7 languages, including Esperanto, I started to consider that this was a museum in some sense about language, right? Not about the thing, but about the word connected to the thing, and sort of tumbled down from there.
Strangely, I already knew about the penis museum because a lesbian couple I know went there on their honeymoon, not to the museum, they went to Iceland, but they also took a trip to the penis museum. So I was already aware that it was in existence, but had never looked into it, if you pardon the phrasing, quite like you have. For the purposes of people who've not yet read this brilliant book, can you tell us how the penis museum came to be?
And this is, in some ways, right from the get-go, a hard question to answer, because collections, we can talk about the first thing, and I'll tell you about the first thing. But the museums, right, they have this really sort of fuzzy point or lack of point, that they don't have the same sort of moment, that apple falls on the head, right? Mr. Watson, come here, I need you, right? That strike, that big bang, they don't have a clear starting point, which is so interesting to me. But this museum, Sigurdur Hjartarson was a headmaster at the time, and somebody knew that, as was and continues to be rather common, Icelanders taking as children, being sent to the countryside. Somebody knew this, and one of the parents of a pupil of his brought him an artifact from the countryside, which is the pizzle. And we know from our Shakespeare, right, the pizzle, the dried bull's penis used as a whip. And we still don't know. No one seems to be able to figure out why this gift was made. And maybe you have received a gift you didn't know what to do with. This man, right, the headmaster, left it in his office, didn't really think about it. And that might have been the end of it, except I think of Iceland as a place that wears many hats, right? Like if you're in New York and no one is an actor, they're an actor/waiter, right? In Iceland, you are a banker, but you also have your textile art project and your punk band and you volunteer on the rescue squad, right? There's a lot of things that go on in your life. And this group of Icelandic school teachers in the summers worked at a whaling station, which gave them access to a part of the whale that is otherwise not used. And they were able to put approximately 60 kilograms worth of whale penis across their boss's desk. And from there, it sort of took on a life of its own.
It's very easy to lean towards a Freudian analysis of why a collection of penises might come into being. But that would be, I would say that would be somewhat cheap. And you resist this in the book. And you say that this actually, the resulting museum is no more a museum about sex than it is a museum about urination. Can you speak a little bit on that for us?
I think this is one of the really amazing things for a museum that conjures up instantly so many possibilities about what you suspect it is. The one thing I don't think you are prepared for is for it to be exactly what it says it is. It is a museum of comparative anatomy, right? This is old, important foundational science, right? This is Darwin, this is Cuvier, this is Huxley. It is a formal branch of scientific investigation that really the surprise should be to us that we don't have more museums of comparative anatomy, right? It is done so much for our understanding of evolution. It is what brought whales into the category of mammals officially. And for everything you might think this museum could be, it is so frank. It is what it said it would be. It is an attempt to collect every mammal species native to the country's phallic specimen. And they've done it. The summer I was there in 2011, it was the last point where the original founder, curator, collector was there at the museum. It's last summer in the Husavik location, and it was the year where they had finally acquired the human specimen. Which is all to say, it doesn't have to make the jokes. It can point up the fact that we were the ones making the assumptions. We were the ones with the baggage. We were the ones who assumed that we knew about this word, and the last thing we thought of was the actual physical fact of what the word means.
I think that's like such a beautiful sort of description of what your book is. It's like the looking at the spaces between what we assume and what is really there, and so much meaning falls in that space, I think. You also mentioned a couple of minutes ago about the difference between a collection and a museum. So of all the hundreds of museums in Iceland, are all of them technically museums that we would think, or is it a sort of grand collection? What makes it a museum and what doesn't?
It is a wildly difficult thing to even count the number of museums in Iceland for a number of factors. I've come to believe it might not even be possible. Right, the official accrediting body in Iceland puts the count, I believe it's at 43 or 44. It just came down one in the fall. So for people that have gone through the paperwork, that have gotten approved by an official body, it's one number. If you look at the museum studies professor's broader definition, and you take away accreditation from a necessary factor, right, it's 5 times as big, more, right, 6, 7 times as big. And that was updated in 2014. We've been watching museums come into existence even since then, right? The Punk Rock Museum is waiting for you down the steps in an old public lavatory. They still have the stalls as part of the display. And here's the thing. I noticed this, as I mentioned in the book, when I first started looking around in Iceland, that almost everything had been established at that time. It was 2011, in the last 10, maybe 15 years. And I couldn't get my head around it. I had no point of reference for it. And it was on the return trip, which we meet in Arrival with Lilia, where I finally understood it's in the language. Of course, the boundaries are so permeable because they don't exist. Icelandic uses one word, sap, S-A-F-N, to talk about a collection or a museum, right? You'll see it when you drive by a library. It is essentially a bókasafn, right? A collection of books. It's not a museum of books. It is a collection. You can talk about a group of sheep by the same word. It's not a museum of sheep. And so it's interesting that as these spaces, right, these collections, these exhibitions have to move into another language, that's part of what defines them for what they are. The exhibition of Sorcery and Witchcraft over in Hólmavik, we're having trouble. People kept confusing them. They tried to do the more direct translation. They didn't have a collection. What was the Museum of Witchcraft and Sorcery going to show you? So they went with the term exhibition, but in the translation, it just never worked. People got confused. They thought it must be temporary. People would translate it to museum anyway. And then people would call being confused of which of these things do I want to go to, not knowing it was just one the whole time. And so I take a sort of liberal view of what counts as museum, but it's really worth paying attention to how these things have named themselves and the ways in which we seem to really want them. We seem to push them into becoming museums through the act of translation.
That's so fascinating. And you've really played with language in the structure of the book. So you've got the main chapters, which you've termed galleries, which are a look at a particular museum and the issues around it. And then between those, you've got cabinets. And you've got cabinets which seem to exist in that liminal space. Like it's unclear as a reader whether they are of your invention or they are real things or whether they are an exploration of concepts that have come up in those things. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I think of the galleries as sort of like these big like pillars in a Grecian temple, right? That they sort of stand alone, but collectively they hold up this bigger thing that unites them. And when I was dropping in the cabinets and ordering them and making sense, I thought maybe they'll just be like a piece of texture. Maybe they're sort of an excuse for me to sneak in all the things I loved but didn't have a chance to talk about. And then I realized once I had them in place that it was almost a minor key that had been introduced, that for the galleries to talk about what was there in these great big undertakings and the histories of these places and why they exist and what they possibly mean, that the cabinets were more about the, loss and where we lose things and that melancholy, I think, sometimes. There's an appendix in the book. It was important to me to use all of the front matter and back matter possibilities that the book as a technology gets to enjoy. So every museum that's mentioned in the book is available for you to go find for yourself through the appendix. And I'm thinking about it now that they exist with the possible exception of the Museum of Polar Bears. All of the polar bears I mentioned, I've met, right? I've seen them in their respective locales, but the idea that they represent collectively something bigger is my own advancement. And I still can't tell you for sure. It's supposed to be really lovely Museum of Wales in the back of a gas station made by the owners because they wanted to, right? Because there was something they loved. And I've been trying for years. I've been confirming and reconfirming. I have the phone number. I have an address. I've seen a picture in the fact checking of this book. I have every reason to believe it exists, but no one ever answers the phone. And the map takes me to a place where there is only fields.
Maybe that's something in itself. Maybe that's part of maybe it's an invitation for us to consider what we expect. I think that's why I like the cabinets so much as well. Like it put me in mind of, have you heard of the Museum of Heartbreak?
I have.
Have you been?
I have not, but I've been thinking a lot about the Germans gave us the word Giftschrank, right? This word for the poison cabinet, which literally exists at the chemist or the pharmacist, but is also a section of the library. And I love the Museum of Heartbreak as one of these places that holds on to the things that we cannot be too close to, but which we know needs to exist.
And it also put me in mind of, I can't remember the museum in Florence, but it's essentially a museum of taxidermy. So there is nothing there that you haven't seen. And a lot of the things are completely incorrect. Like they've got a hippo, but it was taxidermied by people who had never seen a hippo before. So it's wrong. And the cabinets that you've written about got me thinking about this, like the concepts. You're inviting us to think about concepts that we think should be displayed and should be explored and like shared between us. I realize I'm getting very conceptual here, so I'm going to pull us back.
Well, I think it's right. That makes sense, right? There is a headiness to it. I think what we see in this rapid evolution of institutions being founded and made public, it feels like it's pointing towards, by the time you get to the Icelandic Museum of Sea Monsters, the possibilities of freedom. Imagine a museum that was not bounded by material objects. What would it be nimble to do? What would be liberated to do? I think it's really heady space.
And that seems to be very relevant now, when obviously we can't go to these places and we can't touch things that we might otherwise have touched. So what are the things that need to be preserved in this moment, and what would that look like? Yeah, it truly is a book that you can't put down and not think about anymore. You go away and you have a coffee and you kind of stare out and you think, oh my God, I've never thought about these things in this way. I also got to wondering how, because you have a museum background as well. So many, in fact, I think all of the museums in this book start from a personal collection. Is that normal? Is that how, because I realized I don't know how museums come to exist. Obviously you have like national galleries and things, which are very much a projection of an image of a country and what it wants to say about itself. But the more sort of esoteric spaces, do they jump up out of a normal collection?
And I think this is worth thinking about. One of my early premises, my points of investigation when I marched myself to the Icelandic Phallological Museum and sat in the gallery for 2 weeks, was that our perception of museums is a little bit skewed, right? We think that what we have now is what has always been, right? We've come to assume that museum is the mammoth encyclopedic national institution that has been very professionalized and does a lot of work, has a lot of reason to hold on to its institutional face. And it's misleading that these places that stem from amateur natural historians, from individual collectors, from private collections, from family collections, this is the origin, right? This is the history. This is what we've always been doing. And we should maybe pay attention to the fact that this is an impulse that exists long before we start seeing in the 1800s as really the rise of museums as the grand institutions, that right, the Grecian white column pillars in the front institution that we imagine now. And that was a specific project of nation building, but it stems from a much earlier impulse that never went away. It never replaces.
Mm-hmm. I suppose the sort of prototypical example of the personal collection in the book is Petra. Would you like to speak about Petra for our audience?
Yeah, if the Phallological Museum is the best known internationally of Iceland's museums, domestically, I think the most cherished is Petra's stone collection. Imagine a woman on the eastern edge of Iceland where 3% of Icelanders live. But it's the edges, the Vestfjords and the eastern edge that are geologically sort of the most ancient. Imagine a woman who went for a walk every day. And imagine that every day, most every day, she found a stone on those walks. And she did this for a lifetime, from the point where she got married in her 20s and had a house to hold on to the rocks until she wasn't able to go out anymore. It's a lot of stones. It's right, anything, right? If you picked up pennies or blades of grass or kept coffee cups, anything you could keep one of most days in your life, you would end up with a lot of them. And the good thing about stones, I highly recommend, if you're going to have a collection, pick something really hardy, ideally that can be stored outdoors for when you get more things than will fit in your little house. But the thing is, if you do that, it will be visible. And there is now one road that goes through town. When she started, the road ended at town. It didn't progress. You couldn't circumnavigate Iceland by road. There weren't enough bridges until the 1970s. And in collecting every day and having a thing that could be seen, people started to look. Neighbors would come, friends would come, people from other towns would stop by. And eventually there were tour buses. There now you can go still sit in her kitchen and talk to bus drivers and tour guides that have been coming to this kitchen for the last 40 years. And for a long time, Petra refused to think of it as a museum. She would not charge admission. She would just put up 20 cyclists for the night if they needed it. And one day, somebody was standing in her house asking her where the bathroom was, and she pointed to it, and they said, it's occupied. Surely there's another. And she said, no, there's just the one. They said, what kind of museum has only one bathroom? So the collection becomes a museum in the sense that at that point, it became permissible. She decided she could start collecting admission to build the funds to build more bathrooms.
That's so beautiful that it's the sheer weight of interest in something that, many of us collect like stones and rocks and things when we're children. And, you give them to your parents and they get thrown away. Nobody's parents keep all the stones.
No, they don't, Heather. They're somewhere in a closet. We just don't know.
They're kept in a special box and everyone treasures them. But Petra's stone collection has been treasured so much by everyone and so much of her family that now the family runs the museum. Is that correct? And they, I loved when you wrote about the time when every year they come together with her, many grandchildren and even great grandchildren now to clean the stones. And this to me is such a beautiful image. And I wondered if you think this is something that only could happen in a place like Iceland, where, you take on your parents' first name as your surname. So the idea of a familial line and passing on do you think that's stronger than in somewhere like the States or the UK?
It's a really interesting question. I think that Iceland sort of naturally gravitates towards superlatives, right? It is small. It was for a long time very isolated. And I think the way the Icelanders put it is closer to, because we are so few, we have to do so much. And that there's just a different sense of possibility, that because you are the person that needs to be relied on, because, right, there are only so many people in your town, you get used to things are accessible. You can do them. And I think certainly family, Iceland's sense of genealogy is very keen. As an Icelander once explained it to me, if the only thing you can grow are sheep, if that's what everything depends on, if husbandry is how you live, you're going to get really good at genealogy.
There's also a sense of sharing what you need in the book as well. Like you talk about the idea of buying fish is just so ridiculous.
You wouldn't do it.
Because you could go and get it and someone will just give it to you.
I mean, if you live in Reykjavik, you have other things. You're probably too busy. You've got your fishmonger. And you do, right? You have your preferred fishmonger and your backup fishmonger. But yeah, it's like wool sweaters. Why would you buy one? You know someone who knits. Why would you buy a fish? You know the fisherman.
So I think, to me, that makes sense that they would share in these things, and the Icelanders would take to something like Petra's Stone Collection Museum and would embrace it as part of their heritage. But I wondered how you were perceived in these places, in these situations. Did people think it was unusual for you as an outsider to have not only come so far, but to be so invested in these quite little esoteric spaces?
I think the thing that makes me an anomaly in Iceland, right? It's a country that is its tourism is profoundly shaped by the Iceland Air free stopover, but you still see a lot of infrastructure set up for you to do day trips, right? 3-4 hours away out of Reykjavik and coming back, but centralized there in the capital and using it as a hub. So getting out into the country and then spending a while there, when I would chat with people in coffee shops or lodging, I was always the person that had the longest trip, and it was sort of confusing for other travelers. And for Icelanders, right, I would be in small museums, places that most people were spending 30 minutes, maybe an hour in, and I would be there for days, which I have to tell you has taught me a lot about faith, right? Every time that I got to a moment where I thought, I've just misjudged this, I need to be doing something else with my time, I would be reminded by someone who would say, I thought about it last night, or, who's coming in tomorrow, that my presence reminded them that there was something there that really deserved attention. And then they would remember what those things were.
That's beautiful. And did they alter the way they reacted to the space itself because of your presence and because of that happening, do you think?
It's an interesting question. In some ways, I think that these are people that really know what they have, either because they have these personal, right, individual family-run places that are so intimate. And I think about a place like Sigurdur's Bird Museum, which does not announce itself as a memorial to a beloved son and brother who died on the lake at 37, but is that, right, that you can feel the quietness and the respect and the somberness of it, this way of honoring a life's work by somebody whose life was cut short. And then there are places like the Herring Era Museum, the award-winning Herring Era Museum, with smart, professional museum people who grew up in the place. I love visiting, and they can show the pictures from being little girls going on field trips to the same museum, right in the town where they grew up, where they now work, and greet thousands and thousands of foreign visitors a year.
The Herring Era Museum is actually probably the prime example of something I want to talk about next. Can you give us an overview of what that is? Because I had to Google what the Herring Era was.
The Herring Era Adventure, I think, is the best term I've heard for it, because it reminds us, if we didn't think the Herring Era was full of liveliness and excitement and fortunes made and accordions playing and artists come to paint these scenes, it starts to hint at that. There are about 65 years, starting in 1903, where the herring are around Iceland. It's amazing. I think it's in maybe the last 2 years that anyone has had a predictive model of what herring are going to do, where their migration will go, that had any predictive value at all. For most of human history, we've been shaped by this food source, right? The British Empire, the Dutch Empire have huge debts to herring. And we just don't know why they do what they do. These things that amass in schools, it's a hobby of mine now. If you can be outside, inside's not going to work for this at all. If you can step outside and your view's sort of unimpeded, try to imagine yourself at the bottom of 5 cubic kilometers of fish and know that is one school of herring. You begin to maybe grasp what an enormous force they are and how their fishery could chart the rise and fall of whole economies. For 65 years, they're a driving force that brings Iceland towards the economic miracle we knew it to be in the 20th century. The thing is that it's climbing and climbing, right? There are more and more herring. The industry's building up to process the catch. And then I believe 1957, I'll check my dates later, 65, the herring are at peaks, right? More fish than they've ever brought in. And 2 years later, it's just done, right? The herring have been raptured. It's over. Just everything is done. And so if you imagine, right, a 65-year-long gold rush that stops, all of those buildings, all of those piers just abandoned and left to rot. They talk about the Siglufjordar Fire Department in the 1980s being the best fire department in the country because they had so much to light on fire and do practice burns with, and they got really, really good at it. But it left a people ashamed and embarrassed and surrounded by a landscape that was increasingly, to their eyes, ugly and, in fact, dangerous.
And that's such a evocative piece of writing about the museum that you've done. And the whole concept of it is just so affecting because it seems so relevant to so much that we're doing. And what you've done in the book is weave the thread of climate change through it so skillfully and so well. Not only in chapters like the Herring Museum, the Herring Era Museum, I should say, it's not just about herring, but also in the story of the fish that's left in the salt to preserve naturally, but which rotted because of so many visitors touching it. And to me, that I just can't get that out of my head, this idea of us as a destructive force, as well as one that can, share and change and hold things. We can also destroy things, not really through nefarious aims or anything like that, but just by existing and just by being too interested. Is this something that you set out, wanted to talk about in the book, or did it come to you through your experiences?
It came to me, right, it was, of course, the thing that was in my orbit and, present as a citizen of the world, but it was unavoidable in looking at just the collecting mission of the Icelandic Phallological Museum. Trying to define the mammal species of Iceland is really hard because of climate change. Just in a 40-year project of thinking about what mammals are our mammals, which whale species are coming by has changed. If you look at the bird museums, thinking about what birds exist to have the most complete collection, we know the names of the two people. We know the date when the last two great auks were taken from this earth, and the eggs of those auks crushed under the heel of the boot to make sure that they remained the last auks. Great auks, I should say. We watched people my age have such fond memories on the Vestmannaeyjar Islands in Heimaey off the south of the country, because they would go and collect puffins for a whole month, right about this time of year. We'd be getting to the end of puffin season. Puffins that get blown back off the cliffs. Children would go out with boxes and collect them all and wait till the morning and then fling them back off the cliff again. And now this year, children will go out once or twice because the food sources are moving, hence the birds are moving. It's a place that made it very clear I couldn't ignore the huge forces of change affecting that particular island, right? A thing that seems maybe removed, right? A museum, a collection, a thing that is striving for stasis to stop a moment in time. Can't do it. The forces are too overwhelming.
I think because of the climate change thread that goes through it, it struck me that there was, like, if we see everyday life is a kind of level playing field. It seemed to me you were talking about both a building and a destruction. So the building is the collections that people are bringing together, things that we show. But it seemed to me that the opposite edge of that is that the things we have and the things that are just we take for granted, we can't really appreciate them until they're gone, and until the museum to their existence that we have is the empty space. You speak about the empty, is it the salting building?
Mm-hmm.
How much of that do you think is true? And also, how much of the book is a kind of will to get the reader to not wait that long, not wait until things are gone?
I think as human beings, we have a really limited sense of scale, right? Very big numbers, very small numbers are hard to make sense of, right? Very long periods of time, very short periods of time. That there's sort of a physical and temporal scale that we are used to, and things that are beyond that really narrow band are so hard. We need so many tools to grapple with what they mean and to confirm that they exist, that they're meaningful, that they impact us. With the Herring Era Museum, right? You imagine this devastated town, people that still remember the actual high points, right? The boom of it, who were unable to think that was valuable, right? That were so devastated by the loss, by the abandonment, that they didn't have access to that anymore. And as building after building, house after house, pier after pier, boat after boat was being burned, demolished, taken away for a sense of safety or a sense of beauty, there was one thing left, and there was a small enough group of people in town, or I suppose I should say a small group that was big enough to see that they should do something, and to, with the resources available to them, act in a way that made an effect. And with enough paint, by making this last building from that era red, they could call attention to it. They could show that it could be seen in another way. I think the effect of artists in the existence of museums is a thing that I was surprised by and noted throughout the book, that the people that can help us imagine, and not just imagine, but really see, who can show us another way, do so much work in making it possible to get there. And we aren't all that responsive to a lot of other forms of communication. So it makes sense that right, museums are constantly doing what we're all doing, which is marshaling a thing that can be in front of us to get at a bigger story we shouldn't forget.
I just want to let that settle on people, because I think that's a really important message. We've got a couple of audience questions coming up, but I just wanted to ask you, Kendra, how are you coping with not being able to be in these spaces that mean so much to you, that you take so much from personally? One of my favorite things to do over the last few years has been to go to a city in Europe on my own for like a long weekend and kind of get lost in galleries and museums that I don't know, drinking coffee, eating pastries. And I realized that today that's the thing I'm missing the most out of not being able to travel this year. Is that the same for you?
Well, and I know we all had plans. Mine were very specifically to be in Iceland in the summer, revisiting museums I've been going to for almost a decade, right? Families I know, people that have gone out of their way to help me when they didn't need to, and to put in their hands the book that they made possible. So I feel like that is a sense of loss. Being confined, being grounded is not really my natural state. And I note, though, the ways in which it puts me in touch with the things that I'm used to finding elsewhere, thinking about where they are for me right now. I don't think I've ever been quite so attentive to what is growing on the lawns as I walk to the park and back each day. So there's that. But I've also noticed that, so the book, in addition to the essays, has, I think it's 40 odd drawings of Iceland flora and fauna and the occasional scene, the occasional waffle. And it's been really important to me. The drawing has taken center stage sort of over the writing this summer because it lets me attend to the things that matter to people in my life all around the world that I don't know when I'll see again.
That's so nice. And that connection, I think, has been so important to so many people. I've never heard so much birdsong in my whole life as in the last 6 months. And it's been a real joyful sort of learning curve, and also a reminder that when you take cars off the road and you take the sort of bustle every day, the nature has always been there, and perhaps we should pay a bit more attention to it.
We've had the chance to see that this is possible, right? And I think what stems from that is totally different than any theoretical possibility we have the evidence to suggest. Having the evidence right in front of us should make an awful lot of things possible. Exactly,
and spur us to make that change. We have a couple of questions, and the first one I think relates to this really well. Kendra, what is your favorite museum to visit virtually? Who has the best collections website?
Well, I feel like museums that only exist virtually, right, sort of have a leg up in this regard. And there are many possible answers, but I'm thinking about there's a museum of computer viruses where the whole point is it is a thing that had to live digitally, and trying to make safe a thing, trying to allow you to experience a thing that you couldn't otherwise. It's sort of a fascinating project.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I'm going to check that out. We've got another one. Have you heard of any unusual museums or collections? I suppose that would be one. In any other countries that you'd like to investigate next, obviously when we are allowed?
I sometimes think about this, the original top 10 list of world's wackiest museums that brought me into the orbit of the Phallological Museum, and how at this point in my life, I'm much more interested in the Japanese Museum of Hair and the Japanese Toilet Museum than I was in that moment. I think, oh no, these are like specific cultural markers that I bet have a ton to talk to us about. I will say that there is a collection in Switzerland I've been hoping to get to for a very long time. A Napoleonic soldier who apparently had a lot of time on his hands, started taking walks, and the walks weren't enough, so he started capturing frogs. And apparently that wasn't enough, so he learned taxidermy, and that wasn't enough. And then he put the frogs into little dioramas, so they were courting and going to church. That's on my list. The Museum of Broken Relationships, I think we should all visit. And the German collection of toppled statuary seems like a thing we should spend a little time with.
We've also got one, I should say, when hopefully you'll be able to make it to Scotland at some point in the future, and we'll be able to have real events with you. But in Edinburgh, there's the Royal Surgeons Hall Museum, which is basically like a lot of different parts of bodies in jars, which I mistakenly took my 2 young nephews to one year. But it's fascinating and really makes you reflect on your like corporeal form and your mortality and all those sort of fascinating things. I think you'd enjoy that as well. I think we've probably
we'll build out a beautiful day. We can do that, and then we can start. We can plan the day trip to the Poison Gardens. Oh, yes. What a lovely thing to make medicinal collections, but also just sort of reminders of this is possible. All of these things can hurt us.
That's very Scotland in a strange way. I think we've probably got time for one more question, and I think this is a good one. With even established museums in danger at the moment as a result of the pandemic, how do you think these smaller questions will fare? Smaller collections, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting the ways in which small collections are both more vulnerable, and there is, less infrastructure, there's just less that has to be protected. So that might put them in a better position. In a way, and forgive me if this feels like it's sidestepping the question, but it makes me think about Petra's collection again, and how in my earlier life, managing a museum collection, right, having white gloves and vault access and condition reports to do, every once in a while, it would really, really concern me as an intellectual project that we thought that museums were a good idea, that we were going to safeguard the world's intellectual and material history based on what? On a few admittedly eccentric volunteers? That can't be the right answer. But while I was at Petra's, I was thinking about the fact that she's famous, right? She's beloved for this stone collection, but she was collecting keychains and coasters and napkins and all sorts of things, right? Collectors, we don't need to worry. They will, I think, always exist, right? This will always be a drive. And we will keep making museums because we will keep caring about the things that they show to us, right? We will keep visiting and telling our friends and dragging someone along and stopping off the road. And we will keep pushing collections into museums. And I think maybe actually the second half of the book, the museums that started off as museums, there's a whole way of making a museum that exists because you feel the need, you have to have one. The Herring era, they had a committee to make a museum that then had to figure out what kind of museum it would be. They knew they needed this thing. What it was the second question. So I think there's, in the long term, right, our need for them, to make them, to visit them, to have them, to use them, feels pretty undeniable to me. The short-term questions of who is funding, who is staffing, how do we communicate with each other, how do we remember what our values are, of course, is a different kettle of fish, ball of wax set of questions.
I feel like kettle of fish is a good one to go for, given
yes,
that.
It is.
Yeah, I guess the thing to take away from this conversation in your book is that collections are an expression of our values, our social values, no matter how small they are. And that is something that we're not going to lose anytime. Kendra, fingers crossed. I could talk to you all night. And I truly love this book and would talk to you all night, but unfortunately, we're just about up. I just want to say a quick thank you to the Wigton crew, especially all the tech crew who are working really hard to make sure that we can have these kind of events during this very strange time. If you feel that you can donate, please do so on the website. This is what will help keep events like this going. You can also buy Kendra's beautiful book from the website, and I really recommend you do, and also gift it to a friend as well, because it is the sort of book we should all be reading right now. And yeah, just thank you so much, Kendra, for being here today, and thank you for this brilliant book.
Oh my goodness, Heather, it has been such a pleasure. And at Wigton, Abby, Chris, Adrian, Isla, Claire, thank you for supporting us when no one can even see you.
And thank you for the audience as well.